Welcome to a new episode of Sounding Off on Soccer. This is John Krysinsky, Pittsburgh Soccer Now. Great to be with you. We are looking at Monday. It's Monday, May 5th, Cinco de Mayo. Happy Cinco de Mayo as we record this. A few days ahead of the Pittsburgh Riverhounds getting ready to renew acquaintances with an MLS club. This time it is New York City FC. Of course, Pittsburgh Soccer Now, we will have full coverage on site, Highmark Stadium. Look for the likes of Mark Goodman, Colton Qureshi, Rachel Krieger. Will be chiming in from there as well, doing some social media for us. And of course, Ed Thompson with his photos. So Pittsburgh Soccer Now, we will be all over Pittsburgh Riverhounds versus NYCFC. U.S. Open Cup match round of 32. So as we kind of get towards that, we'll like to bring on Mark Goodman, Soccer Rabbi. Mark will be joining me very shortly, but a couple things I wanted to go over. If you haven't already read, you get a chance, the Riverhounds, their current state of the team right now, not great. Not great. They've lost 3 in a row. They've lost 4 of the last 5. And hopefully you had an opportunity to check out after their 2-0 loss to North Carolina FC on Saturday night at Highmark Stadium. The return back to Highmark Stadium, there's a new turf. There was a sense of excitement. There was a sense that this club, which is sort of scratched the surface in the first month of the season, looking decent, looking good on the ball. They were trying to change things philosophically in terms of their approach tactically, actually, not philosophically as much, but Bob Lilly's still concentrating on making sure his teams are strong defensively and doing all the little things that Bob Lilly coach teams do well, but maybe a little bit more of an emphasis on possession. And through 4 games, they had won 2, they lost 1, and tied another. It was like, okay, here we are. They're in pretty good shape. They had to go on the road the entire month of April. Did not win well, they did win 1 match. It was in the Open Cup against Columbus Crew 2. But other than that, 3 disappointing in league matches, and then another loss in the Jägermeister Cup to Detroit City FC, and very at the death, at the stoppage time. So it's a team that's not in great form, but for most matches they are pretty much there. They're maybe 60, 65 minutes in, but one of the trends, one of the concerns is that they are running out of steam. So yeah, so if you've had a chance, hopefully a chance to check out my player grades and takeaways from the last match, that 2-0 loss to North Carolina FC on PittsburghSoccerNow.com, as I kind of wrote about some of my takeaways from that match. It was a disheartening result for Pittsburgh. As I said, alarming trend. And they fell apart in the second half, and that's something that we've seen over and over again. Bob Lilly said we gave up 2 goals in the second half. It was similar to what they saw against Charleston. It was similar to what they saw against San Antonio, their first loss of the season, and of course the Detroit match as well. So this is a trend here, and then all of a sudden now North Carolina at home 0-0. They can't generate much in terms of the final third. Second half, North Carolina sort of turns the tables. Even the Riverhounds had the possession edge at halftime, but that was not to be in the second half. Second half, the tables were really turned. The Riverhounds, in terms of personnel, they brought back Augie Williams. They sat him out for the Detroit match. Really their only target forward that's played any kind of minutes this year at the top. They've toyed with different formations, and we've seen really what they've settled in on is a 3-4-3 or 3-4-1-2, similar to what they were using late last season. They did start off the season playing a little bit more 4 in the back. Again, focused on possession, but it feels like in terms of where the center back alignment has come, it's Beto Yetrich in the middle there, along with Ilal Osamanu and Sean Suber, who I think Suber's been probably the strongest, most consistent in terms of most touches and defending well out of the back most consistently. But that threesome, that group, has made up the back line for much of the especially the last few games, but really for most of the season. the three of them, maybe Luke Biasi, maybe Junior Etau, have all been part of the back line. Whether Biasi is used as one of the kind of center backs like he did last year, or as a winger. It just depends on what they do tactically. But this is a team that it just hasn't found its rhythm once it gets into the final third. They're keeping the ball. They look okay for probably the first half of a match, but they're just not. As I mentioned in my takeaways and player grades, it looks like they're jabbing. They're jabbing a little bit, but they can't go. They can't even land any really hard punches. They're not even landing hard punches, and not really getting much in terms of knockout punches for sure. So they are struggling in that area. So that's kind of where they are. Again, 2-0 loss. It was the third straight in league play, 4 out of 5. It's not a good sign that those things happen. So that game, they have to chalk it up. They have to turn the page, move on. And one of the things we saw 2 years ago, the team that won the total points, won the USL Shield, that team, wasn't playing that great the first month and a half or so of the season. They got Danny Griffin back, and then they went on the road to New England to face New England Revolution in the U.S. Open Cup. And guess what? A positive result. They played some of the guys coming off the bench in that match, if you recall. Players like Tola Shonumi got the start. It was a start for a player like Mark Ibarra in the middle. Those are guys that had an impact in that match, and it carried over through that regular season. So maybe Bob Lilly's got a lot of decent young players, talented players that are sort of working their way into the lineups. He said after the game on Saturday, his quote was exactly, we've been poor in all areas, but also, hey, I'm going to go with the 11 that I think that will play better. He's going to mix it up more. Not everybody's going to play 90 minutes, but we hope we get an overall better effort. So that's kind of where they left the situation, and now they'll be heading to staying home, but heading into an Open Cup round of 32 match with nothing to lose. You're playing an MLS team. We know I'm going to talk to Mark Goodman shortly, and we'll get his thoughts on where NYCFC lands. But I also had another piece today on Pittsburgh Soccer Now, talking about how the struggling Riverhounds can find some inspiration from a short history of solid home performances versus MLS clubs in the U.S. Open Cup. And so just kind of in summary, the Hounds have been around longer than many Major League Soccer clubs, and they've started their history in 1999. So they have a long history in the U.S. Open Cup, a lot more of a history than a team that they're going to play this week in NYCFC, which is interesting. NYCFC just came into existence 10 years ago. So that's an interesting takeaway on that matchup. And in each of the matches the Hounds have hosted in the U.S. Open Cup against MLS teams, they have always been very, very, very tough out for each MLS club that has come to the Steel City. The Hounds have posted 2 wins in 3 matches against MLS opposition, whether it's been at Highmark Stadium. The last 2 have been at Highmark Stadium, of course, and then going way back to 2001, the Hounds defeated none other than Soccer Rabbi's own Colorado Rapids at Bethel Park Stadium, believe it or not, way back in the day. So they are 2-1 overall against MLS teams at home. So they want to keep a win on Wednesday. Will actually put together a pretty impressive with 3-1 mark. So if they can pull it off. So the question is, can they do it? And they're heading into this match with maybe with in the worst run of form that they've had maybe ever against when they get ready to go against an MLS team. So, but if anybody can turn things around quickly, it's a veteran group. There's no panic in the group. It's this Riverhound squad with a head coach like Bob Lilly, who has also seen it all and has been on this United States soccer landscape for many years and has a track record of defeating Major League Soccer teams. So Bob Lilly has his share, has his historic wins. So following that loss against North Carolina, it's just like he's saying, we're either going to respond or we're not. So that's, where this stands, looking at this kind of historic matchup against an MLS club, the Riverhounds. History suggests, based on that 2-1 record, based on, their successes. We looked at the Columbus match and that they won 2 years ago in May. Again, the season was sort of coming together. They beat New England on the road. They had so much confidence from that, and then they came home 2 years ago against Columbus at home. They were probably a little bit more of a confident group, at least knowing that they had already had a win against an MLS team under their belt. Different case, but they will probably be more of a desperate team. They'll be playing with a certain level of desperation to really to look, as I say in my column today, look to turn the tables of their season, because the season hasn't been going so well. But in that match against Columbus, I point out in my column that, Pittsburgh were fueled by the largest crowd in franchise history. And so I don't know. We don't know right now what the attendance numbers are going to look like as sellout. I know the Hounds have been trying to push for ticket sales even through over the weekend. So we are still kind of awaiting to see what the numbers will be. Will it be a sellout? Will it not? We'll probably know right closer to kickoff. So if you haven't gotten your tickets, check in with the Hounds now. We do not know, but that match against Columbus, they did have 6,107 fans officially, and they all went home happy. And that was like Bob Lilly said after that match. They played a huge part. And so the Pittsburgh fans, the Pittsburgh soccer community, the fans can come out and make a difference. Can history repeat itself? Well, one of the things that's interesting, and again, I would like to we'll talk to Soccer Rabbi a little bit more about this, is could history repeat itself? They're going to be playing against an opponent that, despite its standing, all the star power of NYCFC, the success that club has had, and of course this year they're kind of meddling. They're in ninth in the Eastern Conference in MLS, but they despite all of that, despite their probably a much deeper roster, of course, than the Riverhounds, but hold that thought. Despite all of that, they haven't had much success in the U.S. Open Cup, and that's an interesting thought about this franchise. Obviously, probably put a lot of stock in their regular season campaigns, and of course, but no, they've only won 4 matches in the U.S. Open Cup since they come into existence in 2015. So that will be something that we'll be keeping a close eye on. And also, of course, last year they had this remarkable run with their second team in the Open Cup because of the U.S. Soccer and U.S. Open Cups limitations in terms of how many MLS teams got in. Their second team, actually, with their young talent, players in their teens, some in their early 20s, they won 4 matches before finally losing to a USL Championship club, New Mexico United. And so that's just something to watch. How will NYCFC's roster look, the selections, the 18, what that will look like ahead of this match at Highmark Stadium. So, all right, with that in mind, we're going to bring on none other than Mark Goodman, and I'm going to let him in and we'll talk to Mark shortly. So look forward to talking with Mark shortly here. All right, this is John Krysinsky, Pittsburgh Soccer Now. I have with me none other than Mark Goodman, Soccer Rabbi. Mark, great to have you here, the Sounding Off on Soccer podcast, but we haven't talked that much this year about the Pittsburgh Riverhounds, but I would like to kind of get right into it in terms of their matchup with NYCFC, MLS. You're a lot more closer to watching and following Major League Soccer. And I just would love to get your thoughts on NYCFC, Mark. It's great to have you here.
Thanks, man. It's great to be here. Always fun to hang out. Bummed I won't be able to join you guys for US Open Cup this week with the madness that will be. But every writer for our podcast, for our website, wants to go to that match. So
yeah,
somebody's got to stay home and watch the kids. Somebody's got to stay home and watch the kids.
Was busy as soon as the matchup came out, for sure. So yeah,
I don't mind.
Yeah, well,
I'll cover in the dog days of summer when everybody's tired and nobody wants to go out and it's July 28th and it's pouring rain and a thunderstorm and it's also 97 degrees and the game is stalled 7 times for lightning. I'll be that guy.
well, right now you're our guy because you know a little bit of something about MLS teams. One thing that I
I do.
found before we get into this real quick is that I noticed that NYCFC, obviously only 10-year history, but or so, but they haven't had a whole lot of success in the Open Cup. I'm wondering if it's philosophical in terms of organization, how they've approached things. The New York Cosmos, I'm wearing their shirt right now. Not those Cosmos of the '70s that I grew up watching, but the Cosmos of the rebooted NASL in 2015 beat them, and then in 16 beat them, or at least eliminated them. They didn't really have a lot of success in Open Cup competitions. So I found that interesting. Only 4 wins, five, I think, really, if you add the 2 penalty kicks, shootouts, I think it was 4 and whatever, the 5, 6, 7 losses. And then last year they decide, you know what? Well, they didn't, it wasn't their decision, but US Soccer says, you can't, we're not going to have all of our MLS teams in the Open Cup. So some of the 2 teams are going to have to play. And their 2 team wins 4 matches in the 2024 Open Cup, as many matches as their first team has ever won in the Open Cup. So my thought going into this is that they're clearly going to be looking at playing a lot of their young players. They had some success last year in the Open Cup doing it.
Yeah. I think that is a really good kickoff to this kind of whole question of like, what's up? Up, that's the dog. The dog wants to be on the podcast. Hey dog, how's it going,
All
buddy?
right, mine's right over here.
What are you
So
doing? You gonna
she's
behave?
coming back and forth. She's sitting on
All
the
right.
top of the steps as we speak.
If
So
he doesn't behave, he's gonna get kicked out. Um, so the thing with NYCFC is, of course, the same as with any soccer team in the Open Cup, which is how much they want to rest their regular starters. You can
yeah.
kind of expect your average MLS team to rest their 5 best players, keep them on the bench, and have them available in the event that they want to kind of join, like have them in a little bit later. So um, maybe I should get my wife to call the dog. I don't really know what to do. Come on, buddy.
She
Um,
ought to.
so I mean that's a good question. I think, they had a really successful season in Subi, you gotta chill, homie. You gotta join us. You gotta relax and be part of the podcast. All right. So I think that in 2021 they won MLS Cup. In 2022 they made a deep run and they were very, very good. And I think that that kind of tells you that they have a lot of quality. But since then they've kind of fallen off a bit and they're not nearly as successful
Mhm.
as they used to be. They're kind of like trying to find who they are right now, going forward, trying to figure out like what they're going to be this year. They have a couple of really talented players, but they're still transitioning to figure out what exactly is going to be the core of their new team going forward. I think they're waiting on probably a midsummer big signing, and they haven't quite decided whether they have the horses this year to go out and do that. So I don't know what the plan is right now. I do know that I'm going to kick the dog out and see if that's going to help us out. So I apologize. Hang on one sec, John.
We will definitely hang, and but actually, I'll we'll hang. Go ahead, Mark, and do your
Go. Let's
thing.
see if I can get the dog to go.
All right.
Come on, dog. Come here. Come here.
All right. Well, as Mark was just saying, quality podcast here, high quality podcast we've got it is a River Hounds. It's a Hounds
That's
podcast.
right.
What would a Hounds podcast be without dogs? I have
Without a poorly behaved dog.
My poodle's sitting right there, and she's in absolute best behavior tonight. And she's over there and just sitting there. But Mark, you
Maybe
had to,
maybe I
send her
need
back
dog
upstairs.
maybe I need dog behavior lessons. Maybe that's what
Oh,
this podcast could be about, dog training in addition
I don't want
to.
to jinx. I don't want to, because I don't want to jinx my situation either. But
Oh, I know. Good call. All right, so let me talk a
Yeah.
little bit about NYCFC. So I would say they're I was talking about them transitioning, and I think their two most senior players are their most interesting players
Hmm.
on this team right now because they've kind of jettisoned some of their other guys. The Maxi Morales is their little tiny guy in the middle.
Hmm.
He's listed at 5'3". Swear that he can't be any taller than 5'1". He is just an absolute
Hmm.
mighty might. He's 38 years old. It is
Hmm.
impossible to take the ball off him. He used to be kind of their dribbly number 10, and now he's kind of more of their connector. I would very highly doubt that he will start this game, but he will probably come off the bench. So the question then becomes, if you've got a guy who's your key shuttler, who's your
Hmm.
key ball holder, who can kind of advance the ball through the middle third, and he's not going to be available in the match, what are you going to do? So I think what that means for this team is that they're going to be relying on 27-year-old guy they hoped would be the guy, and then never kind of turned into the top flight player that they hoped he would be, Keaton Parks.
Hmm. Keaton
Uh,
Park, sure. And yeah,
Go
I
ahead.
believe was with Benfica at one point. He was playing in I believe in Spain. Um, or he was we did a feature on him. Obviously a U.S. player, U.S. product.
Yeah,
But
Yeah,
yeah,
he
yeah,
he spent 2017 to 2019 with Benfica, but spent
right.
almost his entire time with their B team, which I think is
Hmm.
down in the third division of the Spanish setup. So, and he was loaned out also to a team called Varzim, who I have never heard of. So he's an interesting guy. He's 6'4". He's kind of taken on the role that Alex Ring used to play as a defensive
Hmm.
midfielder for them before he was transferred to Austin, which is kind of the deep lying ball clearing midfielder who can also spray them if you need to go into the corners. So
Hmm.
that's Keaton Parks. Their other kind of more senior player who might play in this game. Or at least, or might start in this game since center backs don't have the same level of wear and tear as other players, is Thiago Martins. And Martins is their
Yes.
captain. He really commands the ball very well. He will be the recirculator, and he's the tempo setter for this team. And I think if NYCFC is going into this match and really wants to um, kind of like muck it up since they're on the road and not necessarily like play beautiful fluid football, that he will be a key factor for them. Their big striker is Alonso Martinez,
Right.
Costa Rican international. He has 6 goals for them this season, and he is amongst the top goal scorers in Major League Soccer. And his conversion of expected goals is very high. So he is a phenomenal player. Um, this team plays in a 4-3-3. They've been doing the 4-3-3 for a very, very long time. Their wingbacks are important here as well. They have a new player named Hannes Wolf who plays both at fullback but also can be a winger as well up in the attack. And
Hmm.
then they have Tavon Gray as their right back. He's a younger guy, 22 years old, Jamaican. Um, and he has a lot of skill and talent, but it hasn't all been kind of like it's not a finished product yet. So he's mostly a really solid guy in terms of his ability to move with speed and to dribble at pace through the defensive line. So he's just one of those kind of like wild outside guys who can really do anything. I would expect that he'd play in this game. And then the last up is Matt Freeze, who is a veteran goalkeeper in Major League
Hmm.
Soccer. He spent a
Yeah.
lot of his career kind of as a backup for
Right.
other players. You probably remember him for Union too.
Union too. Hmm.
And
Yeah.
he got some starts with the Philadelphia Union over his career, but mostly he was kind of jettisoned as a backup, and so he's been their main guy. You know, the thing though is in Open Cup matches, usually you let your backup goalkeeper get some run, and in that case, this would be an interesting one. They have two options to go with. One is Thomas Romero, and the other
Right.
is a familiar name for
Hmm.
old school USL fans, and that's Greg Ranjitsingh, who
Yes.
played, I think, Did he play for
Louisville.
the Battery and
I think
Louisville?
he
He
was
played.
Louisville City. Yeah.
Yeah, and he was the backup goalkeeper for the Trinidad and Tobago
Hmm.
national team. So those are some really interesting names that are going to pop up. But the names that I haven't said, you're also likely to see
Right.
more of those off the roster, since what it is to be in the Open Cup, especially as an MLS team, is to let your guys who've been sitting on the bench and not getting a lot of run get some opportunities. The last thing I'll say is this, which is off of the comment that you made that they have made some nice runs, but they have no actual success in the U.S. Open Cup. Um, and that is that because they're a young team, they've only been around in MLS for 10 years. They've only had an academy in MLS for 11 or 12 years. And so I don't think their academy has ever fully kind of blossomed. The other thing is
Hmm.
Red Bull New York, aka
Yeah,
formerly New York, New Jersey Metro Stars, started 29 years ago. And so they have a long head start on having an academy presence. The New York metropolitan area, a really great, phenomenal soccer resource. There are just a lot of really high level players that come out of there,
for
but they don't
sure.
necessarily come to NYCFC because Red Bull is right there. So, and a lot of those
Yeah, it's
kids go to college. So,
Yeah, and it's interesting. Tanner Rossborough is from the Pittsburgh area. He's was scooped up by Red Bull organization, and Red Bull organization. Yeah, they've had deeper roots. And you talk about in the New York metro area, and this is not a knock to Westchester, to Long Island where I grew up, to all these other things, but New Jersey soccer, like I think that where the Red Bulls have taken root and have been, I think, spent a lot of time in New Jersey. I think there's just a lot of quality players coming out of there. So that's definitely a thing. It just seems like the Red Bulls have a little bit more roots,
by the way,
and yeah,
fun fact, Greg Ranjitsing's first professional start as a soccer player was in
uh,
2016
the
against the
Riverhounds.
Pittsburgh Riverhounds. That's right. You
Yeah,
were you were probably there. You were
I
probably there.
probably was. I can't remember that stuff now. I mean, I'm glad you brought that up because obviously, Tomas Romero too. You mentioned the other keeper. I do remember him playing against Pitt. He was with
Wow.
Georgetown with that team, that really good Georgetown team. I think that was the team that won the national championship in 2019, I think, or so, or played in the national championship game. But that was the name, and he's been in and out of the USLs, too, before being up with MLS. So we've seen these players; they sort of recycle. We see them coming through, at all these different levels. But Mark, what do you think about when you think about this matchup for the Riverhounds 2 years ago against Columbus? I remember you and I were texting before the match, and we were like, "Oh, this is who it looks like who Columbus is going to play, and the Hounds have a good chance." And at that time, I thought Columbus was having some issues with their depth, even though they ended up winning the MLS Cup that year.
That's right.
That was a team that was hurting. They had a lot of injuries. There was some, the Hounds caught them definitely on the right day, but but depth. I just think looking at all of these MLS clubs in terms of the depth, like yes, there's good young talent, and they have these two teams. They have MLS Next Pro, but it feels like that the USL Championship teams that can almost say they have as much depth as an MLS team on last the I'm sorry, not last year, but the 2023 Riverhounds team. I think there were players that were hungry to get into the lineup, and Bob put them into those U.S.
Yep.
Open Cup matches, and they made a difference. And we're seeing some players this year that haven't really fully played 90-minute matches. Jorge Garcia, players like that. Even Brigham Larson. Maybe you just put the young kid up top, just like you did
Yeah.
Tola Shoney in 2 years ago. Maybe you just send the young Norwegian, 6'5". I stood next to him. I'm 6'3", and he is a good two. And my son was with me, the two of us. Jason is also 6'3", and we're standing next to him, looking way up. I mean, this is a big kid, big body. I'd like to see what he can do. I mean, maybe give him a 90-minute run. He hasn't started. He's coming off an injury, and Augie Williams has been running, playing big minutes. I don't know what Bob does in that situation, but what are your thoughts about depth and giving young guys a chance?
Well, my first thought about, I think one of the things you were kind of moving towards, and that this is where my brain went, is the comparison of depth in USL versus the depth in MLS. I think you're onto something. I think it's about salary structure. I think
Right.
that the fact that the USL top end salary to bottom end salary is roughly almost all the same. There's a little bit of variation by a couple $1,000s here or there, but I think you and I have both seen Riverhounds teams over the last 5 years where both teams, the team from top to bottom, could mix and match. There were like a good 17, 18 players that Bob Lilly would put into the starting lineup at any given time. There were always like another center back, a third fullback, two wide guys who could be interchanged one for another. The Riverhounds have had a couple years where they had two possible starting strikers where there wasn't a clear number one. And like four good midfielders for three spots. So MLS is almost the opposite of that. I have noticed, especially this year, that there are a lot of kind of like Johnny Lunchpail players in MLS. There are about 5 or 6 players on the starting lineup of every team that are like they make between $200,000 and $400,000. They're solid but unspectacular. It's a guy who can do a job. They play in Europe at the championship or the League One level. And then every MLS team has anywhere between 1 and 5 superstarish type players. I mean, the best example of this paradigm that I just laid out is Inter Miami, where you've got uh, Lionel Messi, Jordi Alba, Luis Suarez, Sergio Busquets, Benjamin Kromansky, who is a wonderful player who's cheap but an American player, and then
Hmm.
6 guys you never heard of. I mean, that's basically
Yeah.
what the lineup looks like. For smaller teams like the Colorado Rapids, you've got 2 superstar players, 3 superstar players whose names you probably know. Georgi Mihailovic, former U.S. International, although he's getting back into the U.S. setup, depending on what tournament they're in. Zach Steffen, who's the number 2 or the number 3 for the U.S. men's national team. You've got Rafa Benitez, who is Rafa Navajo. Why am I mixing up our starting striker's name? Who is a wonderful Brazilian striker. And then you've got 8 guys. I mean, like that's basically the team.
Yeah.
I could go on and on about this, but that's what happens in MLS. When you
Yeah.
get to US Open Cup and those 3 or 4 or 5 superstar players are going to hit the pine, suddenly it becomes a lot more even. And then I'll just say one other thing about motivation, which I think we
Hmm.
kind of started talking about, which is, you know, since MLS the last 2 years has decided to split the league in two and decided that half the league is going to play their 2 teams and the other half is going to get invited. Their senior team is going to get invited. But the senior teams that get invited are the ones that didn't get invited to Champions Cup. Um, and that means and they didn't get invited to and they also may not have qualified for Leagues Cup.
Right.
Um, and that
And just
means
refresh my memory, where's NYCFC in all this?
I think they qualify for Leagues Cup, but not Champions Cup. I could look
Right.
that up right now. But like
Yeah.
so that's the thing. The mentality of why your senior team is in the US Open and what you're
Hmm.
there for. The question is the US Open Cup going to be the NIT of
Right.
MLS soccer, right? Is
Yeah.
it an also ran tournament for teams that didn't make the other tournament? Or do teams look at it and say, listen, we can win this? Is it going to be treated like Europa League, where like a lot of teams go into Europa League and they're like, this is a big deal for us. You know, if you're the second best team in Norway, this is the
Yeah.
biggest tournament you ever get to. But if
Right.
you're NYCFC and you're coming off of a recent MLS championship, and that year they also played in Campeones Cup, which meant that they got to play against the number 1 team in Mexico that year. Those are big games. They have huge attendance. Like if you've played in a tournament in Azteca in 2022, then going to Pittsburgh doesn't feel all that like a big deal. So does your coach say, all right, guys, let's play the kids and see what happens? Or does your coach walk into the locker room and say the F word 400 times and say, this is a must win game. This is tournament football, ladies and gentlemen. This is the US Open Cup. Like, are you? And I don't know. I mean,
Yeah.
I think when we talked to Wilfred Nancy after the match last year or 2 years
Yeah.
ago, when they were here, Nancy was very sanguine. He was very calm. I mean, he just is.
Hmm.
He's a very chill
Yeah.
dude.
Hmm.
Um, But he was like, listen, we rotated our roster. We're dealing with some injuries. All credit to Pittsburgh. They came out and had a good one. He didn't seem like brokenhearted. He didn't seem like
Right.
broken up. And having covered the Colorado Rapids in US Open Cup for like 10 years, they always lose in the first or second round. And their management always kind of says, like, yeah, we rotated our squad. Things happen. And like
Yeah.
they don't seem to take it seriously. So it's a really good question about what approach NYCFC will take.
Makes me think about a quote. We're standing on the field after the Hounds lost to DC United, and Kevin Kerr played his ass off. We're on a podcast, I could say that, right? Kevin Kerr played an amazing game. Robbie Vincent, obviously. In fact, he obviously caught the eye of Greg Olson because he ended up signing him the next year, actually that offseason. But the Hounds, it was a great effort. They lost. I think it was a couple set pieces in extra time that they just couldn't handle, the size and the athleticism in that case. But it made me think of Greg Olson saying, one of us asked the question, and he thought about the atmosphere, the intensity of the match, and he just in a weird way he kind of shrugged it off. And he's like, well, that's what you expect, like it was almost like matter of fact. And yet there were all these people in Pittsburgh just feeling the intensity and the buzz. And I will say, Nance, at least and I have a quote from him, which was wonderful after that match, where he was like, he really talked about the intensity of that Riverhounds squad and
Yeah.
how they just weren't able to match that intensity. So when all things are equal or depth's an issue, or there's injuries here or there, you've got this, you have a motivated squad with 6,000 people. That's a question mark. What's going on with the Riverhounds? Are they going to sell this match out? It seems like there's a lot of buzz about it. They had 3,800 fans. It was a horrible weather day on Saturday night, but that's hasn't been the norm. The norm has been 5,000 plus
And
just about most every game. So I would imagine that this is going to be a packed house and people are going to really be loud and proud, and Pittsburgh, a lot of Pittsburgh pride out there. But I don't know. I just haven't this team hasn't had the same atmosphere yet this season. So hopefully this is the turning point.
yeah, that's a great point. I just want to point out, I think you also raised a really interesting point about players at a lower division catching the eye of an MLS coach. And it made me immediately remember a tournament that I was covering. And it would have been one of the first years that I was covering the Rapids and really paying attention to the US Open Cup. I was living in Colorado. But there was a team called the Atlanta Silverbacks. You remember
Hmm.
Atlanta Silverbacks in the
Sure.
NSL? And they
Hmm.
had this big hulking player named Kwadwo Poku, who just had a phenomenal tournament in the Open Cup, and he caught the eye of a bunch of coaches in MLS, and he wound up getting a contract with NYCFC in their first year, in their inaugural year, and he was a fan favorite. He played 2 years for NYCFC, and he literally went his story is like fairly insane. I think he had gone from like working being an African migrant immigrant to the United States, working on a green card, working at a grocery store, to playing amateur soccer, to playing for Atlanta Silverbacks, to playing MLS soccer next to David Villa, like that. And he made a soccer career in America for the next like 6 or 7 years. He played with USL for a couple of years. I mean, that's the magic of the Open Cup, and
Hmm.
it's
Yeah.
it's one of those things that goes through NYCFC. So this is an opportunity for some of the Riverhounds younger players to kind of get on the radar of MLS coaches who will be watching this game. The other thing, of course, is it is just absolutely great that Paramount is covering these matches
Yes.
this year.
That's
I've
great.
been a Paramount subscriber for a couple years.
Hmm.
They bring a
Me
slightly
too.
higher level quality
Hmm.
to all of their broadcasting, and
Hmm.
their Open Cup broadcasting in particular is very good. They're likely
Hmm.
to have a guy like Mike Grella step in and do the halftime show type stuff and the
Yeah.
pregame show. And Grella is a Red Bull guy. He knows American soccer really well. Also on that broadcast will probably be Poppy Miller, formerly the Charleston Battery. I think was she Battery or was she Tampa Bay Rowdies? I forget, but she used to cover USL for their broadcasting. So just that brings a higher level of quality and seriousness to the thing, and maybe that'll bring more people to the stadium too, and intensity.
Yeah, and I think that's just listening to you say that. Just I think that's you get amped up. You start thinking about that. You think about like, oh, this is going to be some real good broadcast coverage, high quality professional stuff. The teams, the players. That's a good point though. Talking about the players kind of shining. I mean, Rob Vincent is on the Riverhound sideline. He's there. Kenardo Forbes. The Hounds have coaching players that were legends in Pittsburgh. And then John Bush, he wasn't too bad either. So you got
No,
three guys
great
there
guy.
who have all this experience in these situations. It has to help, especially for these younger players, to lean on all of them, and then having someone like Eric Dick as well in the locker room, being a veteran. Is there a panic? This team didn't panic last year when they were abysmal, absolutely abysmal, especially in trying to score goals and generate chances, and they're there again. It's like they've reverted back to this struggle of they just when they get into the final third, the possession looks better in the middle of the field, and then they don't know what to do. They play it back, and then they go long. It's like they can't figure out what to do, Mark.
It's a great question. I don't know the answer. I mean, I think the thing that you can really worry about with this team is that in their 8 games in USL Championship and the Open Cup combined, they've only scored 2 goals once. That's kind of crazy. And that was their 2-0 win against the Birmingham Legion,
Yeah,
back in March. I think I might have been at that game. I don't
yeah, I think
remember.
you were.
That might have been the only one that one, maybe one of the only two. Maybe that's the secret. Maybe they need to have me out to more games. But that is I don't really know the answer. I mean, I have you probably, I should throw it to you, but like I think that the problem mostly emerges from both the formation and potentially Augie Williams not kind of clicking at the high levels that they kind of need. But that being said, I think USL strikers, they don't convert expected goals to goals at the same rate as, higher level guys. Because if they did, they'd be getting 7-figure salaries and playing in Europe effectively, which is like you have two options. You either get a guy who generates a tremendous amount of XG at the striker or the forward positions,
Hmm.
but doesn't convert that well, which means he's real fast and he gets into spots. Or you get a guy who's kind of like a fox in the box poacher type guy who doesn't see a lot of opportunities but converts them. He's not fast, he's not strong, he's not big, but he's reliable. Um, and the Riverhounds don't quite have that guy. I think another problem that we've talked about a couple of we did a sounding off on soccer about a month ago, and I think one of our questions was, and I don't think it's been answered. Um, the Riverhounds replaced their fullbacks pretty much across the board this year. Are they still getting the wide surface and the kind of like deep penetration from wide areas that they used to get? And I think the answer, based on what I've seen over the last 3 games, is no. But that also has to do with Bob tinkering and figuring out a formation that really works to this theme. It feels
Yeah.
like they're kind of vacillating between 3-4-3 and 4-2-3-1 and something that looks like 5 at the back. And I think I think it's good for Bob to tinker until he finds what works. But clearly, what he's been tinkering with right now is a mostly defensive football, that doesn't generate offense.
Yeah, I think you mentioned that about the fullbacks. Junior Etu last year, even early in the season when they weren't doing that well, he was a little bit more of a force in terms of generating, getting fouled near the box or in the box. I remember he drew a couple penalties. Like he's been out for a few weeks. He came back the other day. He wasn't too bad. Luke Biassi's been pretty good on the wing, but he just had to sit out a game for a red card. So they'll see him tomorrow. He's had good Open Cup performances in the past. They've started Perrin Barnes at wide last few
Right.
games. And he's a newer player. He played in that MLS Next Pro team in Huntsville with Danny Griffin, and he seems to have pace out there. He seems to be a decent player, but there hasn't been that playmaking player out in the width or in open space really since the end of last season when Bertrand Jacquesson, got into real good form as soon as he got to Pittsburgh after being with Real Salt Lake for a couple of years. And they signed Jacquesson, but then he's been hurt, and I think that's probably part of the problem. But just
Yeah.
to have to be reliant on an injured player, if that's the piece of the puzzle, it's still concerning because we're as a team, as a unit. Why are they not, in better form in terms of when they get in the final third? They've generated the second least amount of shots in the entire league. I think Hartford, which has been a
Wow.
terrible team they beat, is the only other team that's. I mean, I think the broadcasters mentioned the other night that it's. I haven't looked this stat up, but it was somewhere in there. They've had less than double digits shots in like most of their games. Like that's just not going to get it done. I mean, I'm not big on you know, quantity over quality, but geez, you do got to throw some shots at goal. I mean, Jorge Garcia's the last goal they scored in any competition. Garcia scored against Loudoun to tie it up in the second half, and it was from distance. I mean, it's not something Bob usually likes, but it was a beautiful strike. I mean, the Hounds need to put more balls on goal. I think that
Yeah.
make some things happen.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't sure what the plan was going forward into this season. It very much seemed after the transfer window or the kind of like a preseason slam shut that Bob Lilly was pretty happy with some of the players who played last year or saw the bench last year. Guys like Alal Osumanu, guys like Junior Eto, Aiden O'Toole, Sean Suber, and
Hmm.
Jackson Walty, guys who I thought were like fine. And my assumption coming out of preseason after they didn't sign a whole bunch of new players was, I guess Bob thinks these guys can step up. And another way of looking at it is they haven't. I mean, Suber's a defender. Walty plays kind of like a deep lying defensive player who sometimes
I think
plays in the back line.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, Walty essentially gives them the flexibility to put Danny Griffin in a false nine or in
Yeah.
an eight, like in a more of an attacking mode. And I think that's what we're
And
seeing.
he
We're
leads the
seeing
team in goals with two. But
two.
that's not what you want. And
You're right.
what you really want is Danny Griffin and Augie Williams putting up
Connecting. Yeah.
5 goals apiece. At this point,
Yeah.
you do not want them on 2 goals and 1 goal respectively, which is where they're at.
That's the
Um,
bottom line, right? That's just the bottom line. We're just not seeing it.
Yeah, and I mean, I think your point about Perrin Barnes is really good. I mean, I watched him. The only time I've seen him play was in the last or second to last preseason game that they played. He stepped on the field for like 45 minutes, and you could tell immediately he was a really fun and exciting player. But it's basically his first season, so it's a work in progress. So,
First
so
season under Bob is always a work in progress too. He's got guys that are, this
yeah,
maybe they're not checking back quick enough or doing something defensive responsibilities, but maybe they're doing some good things getting forward. Like you have to play both ways. You have to be on top of everything that the coach wants. He's very demanding. We know that. But sometimes it takes a while for these Bob Lilly teams to get going. Sometimes they get worn out down towards the end of the season too. But I think this is second straight season where it's taking a while really for them to figure it out. Like you said, he's tinkering, he's still tinkering, he's still doing different things. And the sense of urgency in the Open Cup should it may provide the opportunity for this team to at least turn maybe show something in the final third.
yeah.
And we'll see.
And being at home will help them a lot. I mean, I think
Hmm.
they will feel more relaxed and a lot of the players, because of the veteran aspect of these Riverhounds, a lot of the players will be very up for this game, but they'll be up in a relaxed way. Whereas the NYCFC players are likely to be younger players who've been thrown into a strange environment and a must-win environment, and it'll be difficult for them. But I think the crowd will be a big part of this. If the Riverhounds if Pittsburgh shows up in like 3,500 numbers, which is kind of their average USL, 4,000, 4,500, their average USL take. I don't know that it'll feel as big a deal, but if it looks like what Columbus looked like 2 years ago, which was
Right.
6,000 screaming fans, standing room only, losing their minds, there was nowhere to go. It'll feel a little bit intimidating. Like I felt like the Columbus players looked at sixes and sevens in the first half in that match. They just looked really uncomfortable and they made a lot of mistakes and the crowd got on them and they
Hmm.
kept making mistakes and the Riverhounds went ahead and that's all she wrote. And that could happen here. That could happen here.
Yeah, well, we'll see. It's, the intensity of the match will certainly play out that way. Especially if, the Hounds can kind of get on the front foot and do what Bob loves to do, and that's dictate terms of the match. Like even against Columbus 2 years ago, I thought that they pretty much dictated terms, which is not easy to do, even against an MLS team that's playing the younger players.
Right.
So I think that's the key. And they haven't been able to, I mean, they sort of do it at the first half of every game this year. That's the weird part. It's the first half of every game. They're on the front foot. They're knocking it around. They're doing things pretty good, but they're not doing anything. No efficiency, no execution in the final third, but they're sort of on the front foot. But then what happens is they run out of gas. The other team kind of figures them
Yeah.
out, and they've given up 2 goals in the last 3 games, I think,
I
in the
think
second half. That's
I
not a good
think
sign.
Bob has talked about in both post game and in kind of like in the preseason was just about and you can also hear him making kind of these yells from the sideline is that he wants the team to make more runs in from behind. That like there's too much standing in front of the back line and not enough kind of running to the back line.
Yeah,
But looking at the list of players on this team,
yeah,
there aren't a lot of those guys. I mean, Junior Atu is the run in from behind guy, but he's usually too busy bringing the ball up because of where
yeah.
he's playing, because he's a
And
fullback now.
he can't finish. I mean, Danny Griffin, I mean, he has trouble finishing. He's got 3 goals in the last few years. He's
Right.
scored hardly any goals in USL Championship his entire career. He's not known as a finisher. Danny Griffin set him up he gave him the ball on a platter the other day, and he
Right.
skied it,
But they just don't have a long list of breakthrough speed guys who make
Yeah,
runs in from behind. They have a lot of like Danny Griffin and Jackson Walty and Robbie Mertz are make little combinations and face and kind of like back in with the ball or play little 1-2s. They're not like I'm gonna race through the line and someone's gonna ping one around or over to me. So maybe the biggest problem is Bob wants a guy who's gonna break through the back line they can serve, and he just literally doesn't have that guy on the team. And he can't
right.
turn. I once said about an employee at my job who someone was saying, well, he's not this and he doesn't do this, and can't you make him do this and can't you teach him to do this? And I looked at this person who was trying to criticize this employee and I said, I don't know where I came up with this. I said, a duck is a duck and it can't be a fish. You know what I mean? Like Bob
I
maybe
feel like I've
wants
heard something like that
I
before,
may
but
have made
yes,
I don't
yeah.
think I made it up. I
Hmm.
may have misappropriated it, but like
Hmm.
Bob wants guys who play a certain way, and I don't think they have that guy. That's
Yeah.
my take of this team. So I don't know.
Well, and right, and I think Albert Diqua, he certainly learned
That's the
how to be
name. That's a
that
good one.
player.
Yeah,
Even Russell Cicerone and Alex Dixon, when they were together, the
that's
Hounds haven't
right.
had that duo. To me, they were always on the same page. They always found each other, things like that. Obviously, we can go way back, 2015. Kevin Kerr and Robbie Vincent was like one of the most special pairings I've ever seen. And those are the type of things. Like I think Danny has a good rapport with a lot of the guys. But and I don't know if he and Augie have really figured it out yet. And it doesn't,
Right.
obviously they haven't, because they haven't, there's very little to show for it.
Right.
I don't know though, in watching Augie the other night, like he's spending so much time coming back to the ball, sometimes all the way back to the midfield,
Right.
just to keep possessions going. And he's not having opportunities to get into those runs. And if they do play the ball long, I mean, those are crapshoots at the very best.
Right.
To
A
generate something, like it's just not they need to get Augie into positions where, like you said, maybe a little bit better service, a little bit more coming from there, come through the middle, a little bit more combination play, but it just nothing seems to be, there's nobody's moving forward into
yeah.
that box with any confidence. to complete to just send and bring more pressure.
I
It's
have
just
a
it's
big
not
grin on
happening.
my I have a big grin on my face because I wish Bob Lilly were here because
Oh, I
this
don't
is
know.
right. No, he would
Yeah.
be mad, but I this is the kind of conversation that Bob Lilly
Mhm.
loves to have, which
Sure.
is, and I had a really great question.
Sure.
I threw in a great question to him like 4 or 5 years ago about this
Hmm.
kind of like I asked him to kind of explain. He said a thing, and I don't remember. He said one of those kind of brilliant half-formed coaching thoughts that he says before he goes on to another half-formed coaching thought before another one, which turns into 17 half-formed coaching thoughts over a 9-minute period of a post-game interview, which is that's a Bob Lilly post-game. But one
Yeah.
of the things that happened was I asked him to slow down and just explain what he said a little bit more simply.
Hmm.
And one of the things he was talking about was, when you have players stretching the field, it creates opportunities for players underneath potentially, but
Hmm.
only if they make those opportunities kind of come to fruition. And it does
Hmm.
feel like this Riverhounds team has not quite figured out how to play like small-sided triangle soccer that then expands into large-sided kind of things. Another challenge that this Riverhounds team seems to be having in the games that I've seen is there's also kind of like and this is an MLS thing that you see a lot too, which is if there are three lines of players and the team pings long balls to bypass the midfield, eventually the defensive players get wise to it and they start doing that. And then as a team, you can start working through the middle and building from one line to the next to the next. And so
Yeah.
it's kind of like in the NFL how it'll be like short pass, short pass, short pass, long bomb, because
Yeah.
the defense will like start to adjust and their brains will get clouded and they'll think they're anticipating this and then you'll fool them. That is the
Hmm.
thing that these Riverhounds have not quite figured out. They don't
Right.
seem to be able to variate their approach. You know, they're not going wide, wide, mid, or mid, mid, wide, short, short, long. One line pass, one line pass, two line pass. They're just kind
Right.
of beating the same dead horse over and over again, and it
Well,
doesn't work.
Well, what I think that the league also did was adjust was obviously the second time around against North Carolina FC, that's a concern. And Bob said he got out coached. Here's a team that probably, realized that we don't even need to play a high line. Let's it, they want to knock it around. We'll let them knock it around to the final third, and then they can't figure out what to do in the final third. I mean, that's
Knows
some.
that.
It seems like teams are playing, sitting deeper and deeper. And the more they do, it's, like the Detroit, the playoff loss, to Detroit, that critical dip. Detroit just sat back, and then, they countered when and took advantage of their one
Right.
or two opportunities, their one opportunity. I mean, that's that's something that concerns me because this is a team, this is a franchise, this is a coaching staff that made an effort to be high. We're going to be a much better possession team this year. Well, the teams are saying, okay, you want to be a possession team? We'll let you have it because you're the Riverhounds. We don't think you can beat us that way. It's almost, I don't know. I think that might even be part of the problem. But the Riverhounds are going to have to figure it out. They're going to have to figure that out. They're going to have to be, you know, they're just going to have to figure that piece of it out. And I
And
do think that Berton, was one of those players that does extend defenders. It takes and draws defenders. And if he's on one of the wings, I think that helps. I think if he's on a wing with Augie on the field at the same time, we really haven't seen that. That's kind of what we were hoping for, is that creates space that Augie can then make those runs into. And he was so brilliant last year in a short period of time. I always turn back. He had 5 goals and 2 assists. And I looked at those. If you go back and look at the highlights, those 2 assists were more
yeah,
evident, more they provided the kind of the juice of the rationale behind why the Riverhounds kind of turned it around and became pretty good in the final third in the last 8, 9 games of the season because it's hard to believe as a one player could make that much of a difference, but he was drawing more defenders. It was that simple. And he was creating when he did have opportunities to make passes, he was creating, I just think that was the key. Or he was they couldn't leave him alone, he was making those runs that Bob wanted someone to make, getting on the end of a lot of things in a positive way. And I think hopefully a healthy Bertrand Jacqueline with Augie Williams, this team does need to give that a chance. I think because otherwise, and like I said, maybe there's a Brigham Larson role in all of this, and maybe he's the guy up top as the redistributor and doing all the dirty work up top, while Bertrand can maybe find some and Danny Griffin and Aiden O'Toole has played pretty. I mean, he showed some positive signs. He's got Jorge Garcia who can, I think these guys there's potential there, but they just haven't been able to do it so far.
It's a great point. It'd be nice to move forward in this tournament to the round of 16. This is a season where, because of the way MLS is entering it, and I think the way some of their teams might be approaching it, this is as good a season as ever for a USL team to go out and win Open Cup. And I think there's a lot of kind of like scuffling MLS teams that are gonna bring in their second-rate talent and get blown out and just not show up to these matches. So I think that there's a lot of excitement here if the Riverhounds can get past this match, and we'll see what happens.
All right, well, Mark, lots of great insight tonight. I
Thanks,
appreciate
man.
your time.
You too.
Appreciate giving us all of this, and I think we've got enough for Pittsburgh viewers between this podcast, my little piece that went out today. Not too much technical detail on NYCFC, but between that and this and another preview we'll probably run leading up to the match, there's plenty there for the Pittsburgh fans to absorb and get ready and get excited for this match. So again, Mark, thanks for joining me tonight, and we'll definitely be connecting soon after this as the season moves on.
And for you sickos, hopefully this goes out before the Tuesday night games, but there are so many good Tuesday night games. I mean,
yeah.
We are living in heady times where you can tune in to soccer basically and have 2 matches a day, Tuesday through Sunday, every day. I mean, it's just the best thing in the world. Nothing gets any better. And we live in Pittsburgh, post-pandemic, where there are like 3 or 4 soccer bar options. I mean, so if you want to hang out with people and catch a fish and chips and a pint, I mean, like, you're living your best life. Everything's great. It's all coming up. Everything's coming up Millhouse, as the guys in the Steel Army would say.
Millhouse indeed. All right. Well, again, Mark, thanks again for joining me, and we'll be back to see you again soon on Sounding Off on Soccer.
Sounding off.